Everybody get into the
Awesome. We will give it a few seconds to let a few people join. Welcome everybody from wherever you are in the world. It seems we have a split kind of leadership team managing this webinar today with myself in London, Tony in Texas, and Jenna in Cape Town. But I think I can see attendees in, so we won't wait too long. Um, Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fifth installment of the Perfect Match series. This is part of our six-part webinar series, all about finding out about for you to find the right sales tool for yourselves. As I said, very cool to see lots of people joining us from all over the world today. The people speaking on the webinar are joining from all over the world, so a very international bunch we are grouped here today. So as you can see from the next slide, we've been running through this series since the middle of November. We've covered topics along the way, such as things like sales and marketing alignment. We've covered lead management and tracking. We've covered sales forecasting. And most recently with Enrica, a couple of weeks ago, we covered sales process theories. Now, in today's session, we are going to be diving into the world of data management, a topic for us, which means, how do you build a long-term relationship with your data in things like your CRM tools and things like your sales tools and in things like your marketing tools. So we'll be shortly passing over to Tony to go through lots of great information on this. As a very short introduction to myself, my name's Matt Creswick. I'm the Chief Product Marketing Officer here at Hubble Digital. And like I say, I'm shortly going to be passing over to Tony to talk about how you and your business, you can create a data-centric culture. Before we get started, a very quick intro to me, a very quick intro to Hubble Digital. It's really good to see a lot of familiar faces on the webinar today. If you haven't heard of Hubble or haven't been in communication or engagement with us prior, we're a 175 strong HubSpot partner agency. We help customers market, sell, and service better to help them drive growth. I won't go through all the numbers on the screen that you can see at the moment, but here's a brief overview of Hubble, the markets we operate in, where we have our offices, and the clients that we serve. So lastly from me, I'm delighted to introduce Tony Kennard. Tony is one of our amazing senior sales consultants here at Hubble. I guess just before I pass over to Tony, I'll be in the background today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them in the chat throughout. You don't have to wait to the end. I will be kind of waiting and unfortunately for Tony, keen to interrupt Tony if we do have any questions throughout. But we will also kind of recap at the end if there are any questions that you want to leave until the end. So that's all from me. Tony, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you everybody for being here with us today. I am so excited to chat about data management, some best practices associated with it, and some amazing HubSpot tools that can support your data management endeavors, whether you are a current HubSpot user or you are somebody that's evaluating the platform. So from an agenda standpoint, what we're going to be doing today, we'll start at a high level and we'll talk about some of the costs associated with having bad sales data. So some of the outcomes that can occur if we don't have our sales data in good order. From there, we'll jump into some benefits that we can unlock by improving data quality. We'll talk through some of those benefits. And at that point, our conversation will shift into more of a tactical one. So we'll talk about where to start within your sales process as you are asking the right questions about data. And then from there, we'll jump into kind of the meat and potatoes of our presentation today, where we will talk about some best practices and HubSpot tools that'll support really 4 key themes as you are looking to make improvements to how your data is managed and how your data is complete and accurate. So I want to kick us off with a quick quote from Thomas Redman, aka the Data Doc. And simply put, he says, "Where there is data smoke, there is business fire." So again, simply put, if we've got data problems, we probably have a business problem as well. Now, a couple stats to chew on. This is actually a stat that is from Enrica's presentation on sales processes from a few weeks ago. And as I was watching her presentation, this one just stood out and hit me in the face. And so I wanted to make sure that I included this in my presentation as well because it's incredibly compelling. So a study from Experian shows that 94% of businesses suspect that their customer and prospect data may be inaccurate. Again, 94% is an incredible number. Now, in addition to that, IBM conducted a survey that showed that there is an estimated $3.1 trillion of lost revenue or estimated costs associated with poor data quality in the US for businesses alone. Now, this accounts for things like the direct costs that are associated with correcting errors. It's also going to account for things like lost productivity and missed sales opportunities. Furthermore, 60% of businesses are not entirely aware of how much bad data actually costs them as they don't measure the business impact. So what we know that businesses don't have a high level of trust in their data. We know that it's costing them money. And then we also don't necessarily know accurately how much it may be costing us because maybe either we don't measure it or we don't have great data to base that finding off of. So this all isn't all doom and gloom. I don't want to take us too far down the negative path here. And so while the costs associated with bad data are pretty staggering in themselves, with every problem comes a solution. And so what I'd like to do is kind of gear our conversation toward the opportunities that present themselves and the opportunities that exist that we can take advantage of by improving our data quality, our data accuracy, and our data completeness. So let's run through a couple benefits associated with complete and accurate sales data. And if you take any of these, you could flip them on their heads. And without good sales data, these can become costs at the same time. There are a ton of different benefits that you can unlock. So this is just a couple of ones that I have handpicked that are near and dear to my heart. But let's run through each of these with a couple examples. So first, good data is going to support relevance and personalization. And in this case, I'm not necessarily just talking about, from a relevance perspective, providing things like product recommendations, or from a personalization perspective, inserting a personalization token at the start of an email. Those are great best practices. What I'm really digging into and referring to here is your ability to capture, store, and then leverage small details that you capture in your conversations with prospects to deliver value and delight them in the sales process. So from a relevance perspective, do we have an accurate accounting of the conversations that have already happened so that we're not repeating ourselves over and over again? From a personalization perspective, are we capturing those small details that is going to help us to build those relationships in both a business and a personal manner? Now, we also have reduced error risk. And so I'm sure all of us have been on the wrong side of this from a business perspective. It's never fun to be the victim of an error that's caused by a business process. And so having great data allows us to minimize this risk and minimize the costs associated with correcting these risks. Now, third on the list here, we have improved productivity. And I think often we think of productivity and data management as being in competition with one another. Data management is seen as something that's laborious and time consuming, whereas improved productivity is something where we're trying to remove those things from a process. But from my perspective, I think that the ability to capture complete and accurate data at the front end of the sales process can have a really nice impact on productivity later on in the sales process and also prevent you from having to come back in the future and correct mistakes, correct errors, append data, and backfill on the back end of the sales process. Now, in that same vein comes automation as well. And so by having great data, we're going to improve the sophistication of our automation. Because at the end of the day, your automation is going to be dependent on the data that we're feeding into it. Whether that's how we're triggering a piece of automation or how we are filtering to drive people down different paths in our workflows and in our automation, the better data that we have, the more accurate our automation is going to be. And again, the more sophisticated it's going to be. Now, the final one here is really important because this can affect everybody in your organization, and that is the ability to develop trustworthy insights. So when we're talking about sales data and measuring sales outcomes and everything that is an output of our sales process, these feed into decisions that affect organizational growth. These affect decisions that we make about hiring and adding headcount to our organizations. It can even drive product-led decisions as well. And so if we don't trust the insights that are coming from our sales process, it makes it really hard to make these large organizational decisions and feel confident in them. So the key here is improve your data, improve the insights that you develop, and improve your ability to make data-driven decisions that are going to benefit your entire organization. Now, this all sounds great, and everybody I'm sure that's here would love to unlock all of these benefits, but we have to have a starting point. And for me, that starts with our sales process. Now, I won't go too deep on specifics on best practices around creating a sales process. I think Enrica did a fantastic job of that in the webinar that we ran 2 weeks ago. But I do want to address a few questions that you should be asking as you're going through the exercise of developing your sales process. So first, ask yourself, what data should every contact, company, deal, or object record in your CRM that's considered sales ready or ready to be engaged with by your sales team, should that have at creation? So what is the minimum data that each object record should have? This is a great foundation and a great starting point for us to work off of as we continue on and develop further standards. Second, what data is going to be required to effectively assign your contacts and companies? So we look at this, it's a really simple question, but at the end of the day, if we don't trust the data sources that are feeding into this process, or we don't have complete data feeding into this process, we're taking something that is meant to drive efficiency, and we are basically removing our ability to do just that. Now, the third one in here, this is a fun one for me because we should be asking how our sales team is currently segmenting their assigned contacts and companies. So whether that's in your existing CRM, within HubSpot, or within the other technologies that you use, this is an opportunity to see things through the eyes of your salespeople. And so two different ways that you could do this. You could jump into your existing systems and you could look at the different saved views, saved filters that your sales team is using to slice and dice their database. Or you could actually interview your top performers. And so I love the idea of sitting down with some of your top performing salespeople and asking them to show you how they are working through their contacts, companies, deals within your CRM. What this may expose is a gap that's been created in your sales process, or it may create an urgency to pay attention to a specific piece of data that we want to make important as part of our sales process. So definitely take an active approach when we are talking and communicating with our sales team about how they're using the CRM. The fourth one here is probably the biggest one. And so we want to align with our sales team on what they're going to be responsible for when it comes to capturing data at each step of the buying journey. Now, naturally, I think our brains go to more talking about pipeline and talking about deal stage criteria, exit criteria, entrance criteria, when in reality, I want us to make sure that we're focusing on the entire buying journey from start to finish. So that means when a contact is created and assigned to the sales team from the start, what are they expected to be adding to the CRM? And this can be property data, this can be logging activity to the CRM, creating associations. Make sure that we're fully aligned on that so your sales team has clear expectations as to what data they are responsible for. And then finally, we want to start with the end in mind. One of the biggest challenges that companies come to us with from a sales perspective is that either they don't trust their reporting or they are struggling to gain insights on key metrics that are important for their business using their existing systems. And so we should be asking the question of what we want to report on as we're building our sales process so that we can understand what's going to go into our forecasts. And so we can understand very specifically what those pieces of data are that will be needed so we can make those large organizational decisions downstream. Now, before we move any further, the next step in this process is one that you cannot miss because it is incredibly important. And that is that everybody that is in your sales organization or in support of your sales organization, so that's your marketing teams, your sales ops teams, your enablement teams, they should all have a very clear understanding and alignment on the standards that you develop. And when I'm talking about understanding and alignment, obviously we're talking about communicating what the standards are and how people will be held accountable to those standards. But I really want to tap into the value proposition that's connected to the data standards that you create. So understanding what the value is to the business, understanding what the value is to your salespeople to collect the right data, and finally, what the value is to your consumers or your customers to be capturing the right data. So this is a really important conversation, and it's one that we can't miss on because we need to align on something kind of a greater purpose than ourselves and the processes that we create. So if we align on that important purpose, that is going to help us from the first time that we start implementing the sales process as we continue to go on and make iterative improvements. Now, to the bulk of our conversation today, we are going to address a few themes that are going to support your efforts to build a long-term relationship with your data. We'll start with improving and standardizing your data capture, and then we'll move into specifically how you are displaying your data within the CRM. So not necessarily how you're structuring and doing your kind of back end internal values for your data, but more so how that data is presented to your sales team. From there, we'll move into maintaining your CRM data. This is the one that usually gets the greatest collective groan because, again, it's thought of something that takes a lot of time and requires a lot of work. So we'll talk about some ways to boost efficiency in those processes. And then finally, we'll talk about developing reliable and actionable insights. And obviously, this means insights from your sales process, but I also want to dig into the actionable insights that you can gather on your data health. So we'll talk about that from within that specific lens as we move forward in our conversation.
Tony, just to cut in briefly for a split second. I guess two really important points for everyone on the call. We will be sending slides out, and we are recording this, so we will be sending this video out. Tony is going to be diving into HubSpot to show examples of how you can manage all of these things. But Tony, I guess maybe just first of all, when we talk about data, kind of there's a lot going on, and I guess maybe you could talk out briefly of how people aren't overwhelmed by the amount of data at their disposal, and what they can generate and kind of what they could and couldn't use. And then secondly, that we've had a question around kind of I guess whose job it is to be doing things like enriching data. So is it a salesperson's role to be enriching contact and company data when they're going through a sales process? And again, I'm sure you'll get on to this as you show examples throughout. But yeah, I guess maybe you could talk at kind of how people don't get too overwhelmed by the sheer kind of size of the task at hand. And won't interrupt you again.
No, keep them coming. Those are great questions. And so for your first question, we want to create a focused view within the CRM. So the idea here is what tools can we use and what functionality can we use within our CRM to provide the most focused view and display the right data at the right time. We actually have a few slides dedicated to that, so we'll talk specifically on that topic. And then from the second topic or the second question related to whose job it is when it comes to things like data enrichment, it's going to depend on your business. And I hate giving the "it depends" answer, but it's true in this case. What my recommendation would be to you is to align on whose job it is and whose role and responsibility specific parts of your data process are going to be owned by. And so that would be the best advice that I can give you there. But we'll also dive into that a little bit in the presentation as well. But keep the questions coming, Matt. These are fantastic.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right, so let's jump into data capture. And I'm actually going to relate this to a process that we do very commonly with our clients. We call it lead management, and it's typically run by our marketing team. And what we do is we look at all the different channels through which contacts and companies are being created in your CRM, and we align on two things. One, the processes associated with each of those channels, and also the data standards. So what data is being captured? Does it align with our standards? So that we can ensure that we have consistency for all of the different data that's feeding into our systems. Now, when it comes to specific sources, I want to call out three here because these are the most common ones that we're going to be dealing with. First is forms, and this is really a conversation on alignment. So when we talk about forms, this is really a case where we don't want to end up in a situation where we have a standard for your sales team where we're expected to have the same 5 properties on every contact record, but then we have a form on your pricing page that's only capturing 3 or 4 of them. So this is a great opportunity, again, to go back to that alignment piece and ensure that all of our organizational teams are rowing in the same direction. Another one is imports, and HubSpot has a fantastic import tool that is going to help you to map the columns in your spreadsheet to the properties that exist in your CRM. So that's something that will support this, but I actually want to take that a step further and say that we should be templating any imports that we're putting into the system. So look at the system critically from a property perspective and build a template that's going to be something that you can reuse time and time again. Now, the final piece on imports, I would recommend that you always take a quick peek at the data that you have imported into the CRM once your import is complete. I think all too commonly, we can look at our import, we can see that there's no errors, and we can move on, when in reality, we should take a quick sample of our data and ensure that that aligns with our expectations. Now, the final one that I have here is integrations, and this is a stat that stood out to me from HubSpot's 2024 State of Sales report, and that is that the average number of apps and tools companies are currently using is at over 200 right now. So that number in itself is staggering, and not every one of these apps and tools may be feeding data into your CRM or appending data. But what we want to do is have a clear understanding of how those apps are interacting with data. So two pieces of feedback here, very similar to how we would run our imports. First, have somebody in your organization that is a filter by which these apps and tools are being evaluated. Someone that's familiar with your data standards and somebody that has the ability to look critically at these integrations to ensure, one, that you are putting the right data into your CRM, and two, that you're not creating conflicts with other integrations that already exist. And then the other piece of feedback here is very similarly to what we talked about with reports. You should be doing a regular sampling of the data that's coming through these integrations. Integrations change over time, APIs change over time. So if we are not doing a regular audit, whether that's quarterly, every 6 months, or annually, we are missing out on an opportunity to ensure that these integrations are working as intended, and we're not creating a snowball effect of bad data polluting our database. Now, when it comes to HubSpot, there are a lot of tools that you can use to support data capture. But the one I actually want to talk about today is probably one of the simplest settings that you have in HubSpot, but it's very easy to overlook. Now, we've talked about some automated channels and some different channels by which your contacts can be updated and uploaded into your CRM in a mass fashion. But for some businesses, you may have a channel where contacts need to be created manually, or companies need to be created manually, or that's the preferred method for your business, which is totally okay too. Now, with that being said, for every object record, let's jump into HubSpot. For every hub object record, we have a form for manual creation that we can dictate specifically what properties should be included. So to get here, I went into our sprocket for our settings, then down to your data management section, and then let's use contacts as our example here. So under the setup tab, we have a creating contact section. And if I click on this, I can actually customize this form that will populate anytime somebody goes to add a new record into the system through a manual process. A couple of things to call out here. We can dictate specifically which properties are included on here. So we have that functionality. We also have the ability to make specific properties required or maybe recommended where they're not necessarily required, but we want to surface them to the people that are adding records into our CRM. And then finally, we also have the ability to add associations. So let's say our data standards say that every contact in the CRM should be associated with a company. Maybe we're a B2B use case. What you can do is you can also add that association to this form as well, and you can make that mandatory too. So this is a great way to manage how your data standards are enforced through a channel that often is going to be one of the main culprits when we talk about bad data being entered into the CRM. Last but not least, we do have a few options available to us from a conditional logic perspective. I've got some slides and some best practices associated with those in the deck, so we will get to that. But just know that you have some of those conditional logic tools already available to you within this setting as well. Now, jumping back into our presentation, we are on to theme 2. So again, we're talking about how we are structuring our records and how we're presenting data and information and tools to our salespeople. Now, a couple best practices here, and I know that we've covered this on other webinars as well, but if you have not customized your object records, regardless of what CRM you're using, it is a huge opportunity and one that you should be taking advantage of. That being said, when you're customizing your object records, this is a great opportunity to ensure that we are surfacing the properties and the fields for data that are either part of our sales process data standards or are properties that we're expecting our sales team to complete. And so leverage this top section to show the things that are going to be most important. Now, you also, within HubSpot and many other CRMs, but I love the way that HubSpot does this, you also have property sections. And so let's say that you have a micro process that's part of your overall sales process. Let's say that's your qualification framework and you're using Medic. We can create a specific property section that can be used to expose those specific properties. And we can minimize this or maximize this as well. So when we're talking about focusing our view of the CRM, this is a setting within HubSpot, or this is just a little feature within HubSpot that is user dependent. So this is something that every salesperson in your organization has some control over. So if you have a salesperson that prefers to see all the data in one shot, you can have all of these expanded. You can also have these minimized as well. So some people prefer to go in a more step-by-step fashion and look through data in that method. So we can really cater this to what works best for your salespeople. Now, the other thing before I jump into showing what's needed when it's needed, because I think that also feeds into the focus piece, is grouping. And so while this may not impact your experience within the desktop version of HubSpot, How you group your properties is going to have a huge impact on your mobile experience. So if you are a business that is heavily using HubSpot's mobile app, take note of this because I've learned this the hard way, and I hope that no one else has to as well. So that being said, if we are adding properties to our CRM or into HubSpot, there is the ability to specify your label, what type of property it is, what the values are going to be for that property, but also what group that property belongs to. Now, why this is important is because those groups are how your properties are going to be segmented on the mobile app. So the use case that I ran into was that for a year, I was creating contact properties and just putting them into contact information. And what I ended up with is a mobile view where when I go to expand by contact information section, I have hundreds of properties. And if I'm a salesperson and I'm scrolling through 400 properties in our example here, odds are I am going to get to a point where I'm going to start questioning the value of what I'm doing long before I get to the point where I am updating that field. Now, the last part of this discussion is the ability to show what's needed when it's needed. And this comes down to conditional logic. And really, HubSpot has built an entire suite of different functionality and tools that will help in this process. So as I mentioned before, we have property sections. Within HubSpot, we also have the ability to set these conditionally. And so we can do things like say, once we hit a certain deal stage, show your qualification framework. Or if we're working in a business where we have different deal types that may require different pieces of data, we can create a dependency between the value of that deal type and the property sections that would show below. So when it comes to focusing your view of the CRM, this is a fantastic opportunity to do so. Now, keeping us moving in the conditional logic conversation that we're having, as I mentioned, HubSpot has built a lot of functionality around this, and some of this is new, so I want to make sure that we have our heads wrapped around everything here. The first thing that I want to address is conditional property logic, which can be used to create a dependency between a value of a property and the need to complete another property. So the idea here is, let's say we're using lead status or lifecycle stage would probably be more appropriate with the new leads object. Once we get to a point where we're ready to have a deal created, we want to create a dependency where the salesperson is expected to then make sure that they have entered a buying role for that contact. So we're not associating contacts with a deal where they don't have a buying role. So we can create that dependency. Once this value changes to open deal, the dependency would expose itself in HubSpot. And at that point, we can't save both of these until we have completed all of that data. So on a property level, we have you covered there. Now, we also have dependent properties at the deal stage level. And this is probably the one, if you're a HubSpot user, that you're going to be more familiar with. And what this does is it allows us to say before a deal can move into a specific deal stage, let's identify what data should be completed. And we can either make that mandatory, or just like we did in the form, we can make that a recommendation for what we would expect to see for that next deal stage. Now, jumping in HubSpot, I want to show you guys exactly where this is and how it can be customized, because this is a big piece of functionality. It takes about 5 to 15 minutes to set up, and it can completely change how you are enforcing your data standards. So again, if we're back in HubSpot, we're going to go to our sprocket again, back down into data management and into our objects, and let's go to deals. And then once we're in deals, we're going to navigate over to the pipeline tab. Now, this may look familiar if you're in HubSpot already and you're using a pipeline, because this is where you would name your stages. It's also where you would dictate your deal probabilities for each stage. Next to that, we have our conditional stage properties. And the way that this works within HubSpot, because I think that there's always a conversation about, is it exit criteria or is it entrance criteria? So from a HubSpot perspective, the way that this works is it's more of an entrance criteria. So as we are moving into, let's say, meeting held, if I edit these properties, these are going to be the properties that are going to be exposed when I go to move a deal into this stage. So a couple things to call out here. We can easily search through our properties that exist for the deal record, and we can add those in here. So as an example, we'll add company name. We also can change the order of these. So this is all drag and drop. We can prioritize what properties are shown first. And then finally, we can make these either required or, again, recommended. And so once we do that, all we have to do is click next and then make sure you click save. I've made this mistake a million times where I've set up all of my conditional stage properties and then I've quickly clicked over into the next thing. HubSpot's going to give you a nice warning here, but just make sure that you're saving. Now, you also have some other tools that are available to you, mainly your pipeline rules, deal tags. We'll talk about those in the presentation as well, but just want to call out that that's where these are located as well. All right. Now, when we talk about focusing our CRM view, this is often thought of as a property problem and a data problem, but it also can be something that can be supported by the tools that are available to us in the CRM. So, in terms of HubSpot tools that are going to be in support of this process, I want to call out playbooks here. And if you're unfamiliar with playbooks, these are essentially note-taking documents that can be customized as a guide to follow through on any process related to your business. Now, two things that I want to call out here because playbooks can help how we capture data, but they can also help how we focus our CRM view. First, when it comes to capturing data, you can enter questions into your playbooks. Let's say we have a discovery playbook where we're going through a BANT qualification framework. What we can do in here is we can actually specify, if you're an enterprise user of Sales Hub, specifically what properties we want to see updated by the responses to these questions. So what we can do is we can work just out of the playbook and we don't have to be moving around on the object record while we're having a conversation, or we don't have to go back and enter that data a second time. So this can really help in terms of focusing how we're capturing data, but also removing some of the double entry needs that may exist there. Now, the other thing, and this is something that is fairly new within HubSpot, but I think is incredibly valuable, is the ability to recommend a specific playbook. So the way that this works is if you are editing a playbook and you go into your settings, you're going to see recommendation settings. And the way that this works is you would simply add a filter, and that filter is going to dictate that that playbook would be recommended. So in our example here, I've set up a simple filter. These work in the same way as your contact views, as your automation triggers, things of that nature. But my filter says that anytime a deal stage is any of meetings scheduled, we want to show this playbook and make it recommended. Let's say for this use case, this is our discovery playbook. Now, what will happen anytime that deal stage is changed to meeting scheduled is this playbook will move to the top of my list. It will also have a recommended tag next to it. So again, when we talk about how we're structuring and focusing our CRM view, this applies to not only the data that you have in the CRM, but also the tools that your sales team is using. I'll pause there. Matt, any questions before I keep moving?
Yes, Tony, great time to pause. So I know obviously the next theme you're going to go through is maintaining your CRM data, and I think we had a question which kind of links nicely to this. So the question is around kind of using import templates. Obviously, as you're importing brand new data into HubSpot, one of the options is to use a CSV file or something similar to load new object data into HubSpot. And I guess the question, which you can answer now, but I think you'll also go into it throughout the next kind of few slides, is around how you are keeping those contacts or those objects updated. Do you need to kind of re-export them, update information outside of HubSpot, and then re-import the data? Or kind of how do you manage that within the system itself? So I think kind of, maybe you can answer that briefly, but then also kind of over the next few slides. And then I think a second question kind of from myself is obviously you focused a lot on how a CRM or sales admin can set up a tool like HubSpot or whichever CRM system you're using ultimately in order to kind of manage data appropriately. How much emphasis would you also put on the kind of culture side of the business? So, it's all very well setting up as many triggers and questions and fields and properties, etc., in order to kind of capture as much data as you can. But then there's also how do we encourage our employees to be thinking in a kind of data mindset? So, yeah, I guess kind of two maybe separate areas to cover.
I love both those questions. So let's dive into the first one. And this really comes down to identifying your source of truth when it comes to updating contacts. Oftentimes, we see portals that are connected to things like imports being added, connected to other data enrichment tools. And so the key here is to create an understanding internally around what specifically is going to be the source of truth when we want to see contacts, object records, things of that nature being updated in the system. And then ensuring that we have a clear accounting of when something was done and why it was done so that we can ensure that that's aligned with our business process. Now, in terms of when the right time is to do that, I think it depends on your industry, and I think it depends on how the data in your CRM is going to be changing over time. This can kind of depend on B2B versus B2C use case, so I don't want to go too deep here, but the best feedback I can give you there is to identify what should be the priority when it comes to the source of truth for your data. Now, Matt, for your question, I love this one because I think it leads back to that point of aligning on the value behind why we're doing the things that we're doing in the CRM. But from a cultural standpoint, I think also this is one where our salespeople need to feel like they're supported by leadership and our admin team in the same way that the organization is supported by what our salespeople do by driving revenue for the business. And so I think that this comes down to things like training, things like I love businesses that do feature rollouts when they make a change to their systems. So communicating that internally, marketing these things to your team as well, so that they understand why we're doing the things that we're doing, and having that culture of transparency, to me personally, is very important. So I think the culture aspect is something that's really important. And I think the other aspect of this is kind of the balance between accuracy, completeness, and friction. So where can we add accuracy and completeness through automated processes and through tool usage to balance out the scales between friction and what we're asking from a data perspective? Because I think usually we can end up in a situation where you're going a little bit too far down one or the other. So that's kind of the high level answer there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tony. I will let you continue while perhaps whilst you continue on the next piece, because I think it links in nicely. We've had a question around kind of how you can set up proactive measures to prevent data issues from arising in the first place. So I think kind of part of maintaining your CRM is how do you stop bad things happening before you spot them.
Love it. So these next two topics are going to dive directly into that. And so obviously there are a ton of ways that we can do this. So we're not going to cover everything that's possible today, but definitely want to highlight a few things that will make life a little bit easier when it comes to creating those control measures, and then also measuring the effectiveness of your data quality efforts as well. So without further ado, let's jump into maintaining your data. And this is one that's really important for your business because, again, according to HubSpot's State of Sales report, 72% of company revenue comes from existing customers, which makes sense because these are people that are already in your database. They should know and love you already. And so it's incredibly important that we're keeping their information up to date, whether that's through automated or manual processes. I think that's a conversation for another time. But the fact here is that we need to make sure that we're keeping these up to date, and that we have accurate information about our customers, because these are really our best opportunities to close business, and these should be the best people for us to be working with. With that being said, a couple best practices that I want to call out here. First, we should be creating clear standards around not just the properties and the data that we're adding into the system, but also things like object associations and activity logging. So object associations, a good example here is for every deal, we should have a contact associated with it. And for activity logging, not only should we kind of have a clear understanding around what activity should be logged to the CRM, we also should have an understanding of the benefits of making sure that we're associating the right activity with the right object record. So as an example, if you're sending a contact an email about a deal that you're working on with them, we want to have that thread pop up on both the contact record and the deal to ensure that you're not having to bounce around to find the communication that you're referencing. That being said, HubSpot does this automatically in a lot of ways, so it is incredibly beneficial when it comes to making sure that we have the right information in the right places. But I always tell people this is something that as you're going through your day-to-day processes, to just keep an eye on it as well. Now, we also talked about automation and the impact of data on automation, but I want to flip that around and talk about the impact that we can have on data by using automation to enrich our records based on known data. So this is kind of a piece of leverage that we can use, again, to feed into the way that we're supporting our sales teams. So on the right-hand side here, I've got a really simple, really straightforward workflow example. I'm sure that most of us have a little bit more qualifying material going into our ICP fit tiers. But for the example, let's say we know that a company size is above 50 and their annual revenue is above 5 million, and that makes them a fit as a tier 1 ICP fit in our CRM. We can look for this information and then have an automated action occurring that updates that property. So on the back end of the system, we have processes in place that are helping to append and fill in data based on what we already know about that object record. Now, this one's personal to me, but I am a big fan of saying that every sales record, whether that's a contact, company, or deal, that is actively engaged in your sales process should have some form of a next step or future activity associated with them. So this can be a descriptive next step that may be on your deal records, or this could be a future activity in the form of a task or a meeting that's scheduled for the future. Main goal here is just to make sure that people aren't falling through the cracks, and we have a control measure in place that we can monitor to ensure that we're not losing out on sales opportunities. And then the final best practice here is to review for duplicate records and formatting issues. Now, this is one that can be time consuming, and it can be manual in some respects. With that being said, we'll talk about a few tools that will make life easier in this regard, but I also want to stress the importance of consistency here. Whether you are updating 10 records every day or 100, the key here is to have a process in place by which you're visiting this on a regular basis and on a regular cadence. So that's the best practice feedback that I can give you there. Now, when it comes to tools that will help us to expose data quality errors as well as kind of set standards ahead of those errors occurring, I want to call out two specific ones as they relate to your deal pipeline. First, we have deal tags. Now, the way that deal tags work is going to be very similar to your playbook recommendations. And so all you have to do within your deal settings, as I mentioned before, this is where you would configure your pipelines. And just to the right of this, we have these additional settings. All you need to do for your deal tags is set up the filter that's going to drive that deal tag appearing. And so what will happen once you create a filter and that deal tag is met, the tag will be applied within the board view of your deal pipeline. And so you can easily filter on that. So you could pull up a filtered view, and then once that tag no longer, or once that deal no longer meets the criteria for the tag, it will be automatically removed. Now, as an example here, I've got one that is a tag for a missing contact. As I just mentioned, as a best practice, we should have a contact associated with every deal. So our simple rule that we're creating for this deal tag is we are looking for deals that have no contact associations. Based on that, we go ahead and populate this deal tag, and then this is a coaching opportunity for us to run through pipeline, address these issues, and make sure that we have a clean pipeline with all the appropriate associations in place. Now, on the front end of this, I know part of the question is also, how do we avoid this from happening in the first place? And HubSpot recently rolled out a new feature called Pipeline Rules. And what this is it's a series of really simple toggles that you can jump into your deal settings and set up. So for things like limiting deal creation to a single stage, or things like restricting deals from skipping stages or moving backward, if these are rules that are important and germane to our sales process, we need to make sure that we are setting the system up to reflect those as well. So if you haven't checked out pipeline rules in deal tags, this is a fantastic opportunity. We also have a suite of data quality functions and tools that it's available within HubSpot as well. And many of these are going to require a Ops Hub subscription. But if you haven't looked at Ops Hub before, especially when it comes to pairing it with Sales Hub, they are a perfect marriage of two sets of incredible functionality. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be your data quality command center. And so we get here by going into reporting, data management, and then data quality. And really what this is this is HubSpot telling you what some of the most urgent data quality issues are that exist in the CRM. So as we move down this, you have things like data monitoring, property gaps, so properties with no data, properties that are unused, duplicates, formatting and duplicate issues with our records, and then some functionality associated with things like data sync, monitoring our integrations for potential errors, as well as our workflows, maybe workflows that aren't turned on, that are unused, or are in need of review. And so the other nice thing about this is that this is interactive. So I can come in here, I can deal with my duplicate issues, I can do these in bulk, or I can evaluate these directly through this tool. I also can adjust the filtering so I can see specifically over a time frame that I dictate what's happening within the CRM. Final thing I'll call out here is that we can dig deeper into any of these by clicking the down arrow here next to the title of this screen. And we can dive specifically into things like data monitoring and address these issues as well. So if you haven't checked out data quality, this is something that is incredibly valuable. A couple other ones that I just want to touch on real quick. You also have with OpsHub a data model tool. This is going to help you to visualize all of the objects in your CRM and the relationships between them. So if you're looking at this from a high level, more IT perspective, it's a great tool to use. You also, with OpsHub, have data formatting workflow actions. And so these are actions specifically dedicated to ensuring that the formatting of our object records is in line with our expectations. And so if you haven't checked that out, that's another good one too. And then finally, we have HubSpot Insights. So this is actually something that's within your company settings. And what this does is it automatically appends your company records with known information from HubSpot's Insights database. And so if you have not turned the setting on within your company settings, I would encourage you to do so because it's going to fill in information along the lines of company size, annual revenue, location, things that you may have to be currently pulling in manually that could be updated automatically from within HubSpot. Now, we've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to keep us moving into our final topic here, which is developing actionable insights. And so again, we talked about developing actionable insights on the outputs of your sales process. But what I really want to focus on here is developing actionable insights by reporting and using functionality associated with measuring your data quality. So first things first here, this is the obvious one. We can report on the health of our data. And so that would include pipeline health and database health. And what we want to do as an exercise here is identify what we would dictate to be outliers in these processes or gaps that we want to identify in these processes. And then it's as simple as creating a series of reports, building them into a dashboard, and having that available for review on a regular basis. We'll jump into the specifics here in just a second, but I also want to move into these bottom 2 points. First, we should be scoring our records. Now, what I mean by that is within many CRMs and specifically within HubSpot, you have a property type called score. Now, in most cases, we think of this as something that we would use for something like lead scoring. But in reality, it's a score that we can apply to really any process that's related to our business. And so as a use case here, let's say we've identified 20 properties that we want every contact to have completed by the time they have a closed deal. What we can do is we can then assign a score of +1 for every property that fits in that 20 that is completed, giving us an overall score out of 20 of the number of properties that have been completed on that record. You can then take that and create an average across your entire database. So you have like a contact score, you would have a deal score, you would have a company score. And so this is a great tool to use if you're looking to implement something like that. You can even do things like weighted scoring based on the importance of a specific piece of data. So if you're not using scoring properties to score your records, definitely check that out as a beneficial functionality. And then finally here, this is for your B2B and account-based selling use cases mainly, but make sure that you're clearly identifying your target accounts and specifically monitoring any activity related to them. And so this is an important step to make sure that we're focusing on the data that matters most for us, and that we've got a clear way of pulling and identifying these target accounts. And again, I'll show you an easy way to do this in just a second. Jumping into the reporting piece, something that I recommend for pretty much every client that I work with is going to be a pipeline health dashboard. Now, within HubSpot, you have sales analytics, which will be very helpful in analyzing your sales outcomes and what's happening with your pipeline. But this would take this a step further as we are looking to identify specific use cases where something in our pipeline is not as expected. And so a couple use cases that I typically would start with here would be deals with missing associations. We've talked about this one, but having a report that shows us in real time how many deals in our pipeline are missing an association can be really beneficial. Second, we have deals with past due close dates. This is a pet peeve of mine. So we would be looking for any deals that are not closed, won, or lost that have a close date that has passed. And so the key here is that this can impact our forecasting. It's also an impact or also a opportunity to tighten up our forecast. And this can also impact how we are looking at our deal pipeline as a whole. So just make sure that we have alignment and that we have accurate close dates. Next, we have deals with no recent activity. Now, HubSpot is going to help us surface these within our board view of looking at our deals as well. But I think the opportunity here is to identify what our threshold is for a deal that should be considered at risk or a deal that is no longer active in our pipeline. So let's say that's after 90 days, we want to add that deal to this report to ensure that we are either coaching our reps on this or we are putting an automated process behind this where we may be closing out the deal and sending a notification to the rep to continue on working that account or that contact. Last two in here, obviously we have pipeline rules that can help us avoid things like skip stages from the start. But if that's not something that you have turned on, measuring deals with skip stages is a really helpful way to understand what's going on within your pipeline. Also within HubSpot, you have waterfall reports, you have deal journey reports, you have other things that are readily available to you. But this is a great opportunity just to understand how deals are moving about within your pipeline. And then the final one I have here is going to be something that we actually worked on with a client recently. And I absolutely love the idea that they had. They wanted to track deals that fall as outliers outside of what they dictated to be minimum or maximum values. So the idea here is, let's say your average order value is at $50,000 and someone creates a deal in your system for $10 million. Now that should stick out like a sore thumb to begin with, but we also want a process in place to either notify that salesperson or expose that in a report so that we can address it so that it's not lingering in our pipeline and potentially causing issues downrange. Final thing I have before we open things up for questions is the target accounts index page in HubSpot. So we talked about tracking target accounts, but HubSpot gives us a fantastic tool that we can use in order to do this. So if you haven't checked out target accounts before, it's under your contacts menu under target accounts. And the next question that you may be asking is, how do I actually use this? And target accounts are going to be dictated by a company property called target account. It's a yes/no property. And so if you have target accounts set to yes for any company, they will be added to this workspace. Now, a couple of things to call out here. You have a really nice overview of your total target accounts, accounts with open deals, as well as some potential data gaps as well. And then below that, you have more of a detailed breakdown of those specific target accounts. The main thing I want to call out here is that this is a fantastic coaching opportunity. So you can filter this down to a specific contact or a specific owner of that company. And from there, coach them either using the filters, using your best practices, or using the preset filters that we have in here in HubSpot to identify opportunities within their target accounts, whether that is for them to conduct further outreach, create future tasks, create future activities associated with those. There is a wealth of information that's presented to you here, and it is a fantastic coaching tool. Last but not least, HubSpot's actually going to even give you recommendations on other accounts and companies that exist in the CRM that may be a great fit from a target account perspective. So the feedback here is if you are using an account-based sales strategy of any type, this is a fantastic tool, and I would encourage everybody to be using this because it is something that requires zero setup. It's readily available to you in the platform, and it's a great way to work through the accounts that matter most to your business. That being said, I'm going to jump back into the deck. That wraps us up from a presentation perspective. And so, Matt, I want to open things up to the audience to see if there are any additional questions.
Awesome stuff, Tony. Awesome, awesome. We'll give you a brief second to catch your breath. That was a lot of yeah, that was a lot of really cool information. I'm I'm slightly overwhelmed with kind of how many different things you can do, different triggers, different rules you can be setting up. So as Tony referenced, feel free to share any questions in the chat. We've got about 9 minutes left before we need to let Tony run off to start doing some of this cool stuff for clients today. But Tony, maybe to kick things off, I've got kind of a two-pronged question for you. One would be kind of for folks on the call today who may be like a HubSpot user, they may have a CRM in place, whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce, Dynamics, Soho, etc. They're looking to kind of improve their data management, improve what they can get out of data, improve decisions that are being made, this kind of thing. Where should they start kind of from all that information you shared today? What's kind of the next step to make this feel slightly more achievable or slightly more kind of realistic in terms of kind of progression? So yeah, maybe let's start there.
Yep, absolutely. So I think this comes back to the sales process because as we put together our sales process, it's important that we identify the minimum standards as a first step in that process. And so I would say if you're looking to make improvements to your data quality or improve how you are updating or capturing data as part of your sales process, asking that question at the start of your sales process is going to really set you up for success because it kind of gives you a starting point by which you can build on. And then once we identify our minimum standards, every decision that flows after that, when we're talking about should salespeople be capturing this or that, should be more of a conversation around, is this something that we can automate via a process, or is this going to add too much friction to the process and be something that is going to prevent our salespeople from doing what they love and are best at, which is selling. So I think that we start with our foundation, we start with our minimum requirements, and then we move our way into evaluating the decisions that stem from that.
Cool. Okay, awesome. I really like the line around allowing your salespeople to spend the time selling and not spend the time trying to manage data. So I'm sure there is multiple salespeople out there who really resonate with that. Tony, I guess a couple of questions from the floor. Maybe you can talk briefly around kind of best practices when managing parent and child companies within CRM.
Yeah, the first one would be when it comes to deals, make sure that your parent company is associated with the deals that are related to it. It's all too easy to associate a deal with a child company. And if you want that data to roll up effectively to the parent, the best practice feedback I can give you there is to ensure that that parent company is associated with the deal as well. So that, and then identifying how you want them to be structured as well. So this comes back to the planning phase and the sales process phase is identifying what an ideal structure is for how you want to manage your relationships with those companies. And I know that can be industry specific, so I won't go too deep there. but really making sure that we have identified all of the revenue opportunities associated with the parent is going to be one of the most important things for me.
Okay, awesome. Good stuff. Fantastic tip. Um, and then lastly, Tony, this is a question which I promise you I didn't write. This is a question from the floor that may lean, you might need to lean on into your vulnerable side slightly. What's one big data management mistake you've made? What did you learn and how did you overcome it?
Rushing into a process and trying to do data management exercises or practices quickly and without the appropriate strategic thought behind them. Something I've done early in my career and something that I've definitely felt the effects of. So I'm happy to be vulnerable there. But if you are considering a new data process, map it first, ensure that it aligns and doesn't create conflicts with your other processes so that you are not looking at this 6 months down the road and asking where you went wrong. I've done that myself. I wish I did not, but it was a great learning experience. So take a strategic approach to data management. Don't be reactive, be proactive in your efforts to improve it. And I think that that would be something that would really set you up for success.
Cool. Awesome. Amazing. Really good stuff. Um, Lastly, before we kind of close off, Tony, one last question is, do you have any tricks around strategic data mapping?
Oh, that's a good one. There are tools available for it. I'm a big Lucid chart fan or a spreadsheet fan. So when you're talking about mapping your different properties, create an integrations worksheet where you have all of the different systems, what data is coming into them, what data is coming out of them. I love spreadsheets for this perspective, but then also map that out in something like a Lucid chart or a Miro board to get a visual understanding of the interactions between the different systems that you're working with. So those are my top two, obviously dependent on a lot of different other variables, but I think starting there can help.
Yes, absolutely. I think even with my marketing hat on, whether it's marketing, sales, kind of anything to do with process and data alongside, Hubble has a large Lucidchart membership for this kind of stuff. So um look, we will let you shoot in a second, Tony. I believe you've got your contact details on the next slide. So if anyone does have any further questions or insights or content that Tony can share, you can see Tony's email address here. Also feel free to connect with Tony on LinkedIn as well. Um, as I said at the start of the webinar, this is webinar 5 of a 6-part series. We are going into the last webinar of the series on the 14th of February, which happens to be Valentine's Day, which links nicely with the kind of theme of the series. We'll have Shireen Robinson from Hubble talking about time management and productivity for sales reps and for sales teams. So really looking forward to that. As I said, we'll be sharing the recording, we'll be sharing the slides for anyone who's been in attendance or anyone who wasn't able to make it. So look out for emails on that. The recording will be on the landing page probably at some point tomorrow, I believe, once we've had a chance to tidy it up and stuff. So yeah, we look forward to seeing you hopefully on the 14th. Any questions in between, you've got Tony's contact details, you've got our team's details, but I will wrap up the webinar by saying, Tony, a big thank you again to you. That was a lot of really good insights, a lot of really good takeaways for people looking to manage their data more efficiently.
Yep. Thanks so much, Matt. And thank you to everybody that came out today. Hopefully everybody pulled something out of this presentation that you can go and use, whether you're in HubSpot or in another system. And really appreciate the opportunity.
Good stuff. Hope everyone has a really good rest of the day.
Sounds good. See you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye.